Tony in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
How you doing?
Good.
It's great to talk to you again, Tom. I got some friends here with me. We're all watching you on YouTube, and there's about 8 of us, and we were having a conversation
Cool.
about
Hi.
white male privilege, and you're the only guy I've ever heard explain it without the racism and the foolishness. And so I was hoping you could do that as it pertains to Trump's cabinet and this beta he got on his cabinet, Ben Carson. He's like the most beta black person we've ever met in our lives. And anyway, I wanted you to explain that. And to my conservative partners here with me, they want to know how you became the #1 progressive radio talk show host without bragging about how great you are and how you can do it with one hand tied behind your back.
Persistence. I've been doing this show for 14 years. We literally started it in our living room.
Listening to Rush Limbaugh, I guess.
Yeah, it's just persistence. It's persistence always wins the day. Tony, my understanding of white privilege was largely informed by Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, at least in my modern understanding of it. I mean, I've always had a sense of it, but I never really understood it until really the last decade of my life here. And Michelle Alexander described it as a kind of invisible knapsack filled with tools and keys and things that are just generally not available to other people. When I'm explaining it to white people, I would say, you wake up in the morning, you white guy, and you don't wonder, what's this day going to be like because of the color of my skin? Am I going to be dissed in a restaurant? Am I going to be followed around a store? Am I going to not get that job? Am I not even going to get called back for that job because I've got a name that sounds like I might be black? Am I going to be stopped by the police for driving while black? White people never even think about that. The biggest piece of white privilege is never having to think about white privilege, which is why most white people don't even know what white privilege is, because that's the essence of white privilege, is that you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about race. And particularly given that probably about 70% of white people live in areas where they have virtually no contact with black people at all, other than what they see on TV. And if they watch Fox News, God forbid, that's it in a nutshell for me. I mean, there's a whole lot of other dimensions to it, and you can tell me, Tony, if there's any particular pieces of that you want me to expand on. But I've not heard the phrase beta black person. I'm assuming you're African American. What's your and as a white guy, I don't think that I should be the one who's passing judgment on Ben Carson in this regard. If you're African American, I'm curious your thoughts on him.
My thoughts on Mr. Carson. First of all, black people love Ben Carson. Before he endorsed Trump, we were wondering what was going through his mind when he did that. Ben Carson, for black people, is one of the most successful men on the planet. And I had a poster of Ben Carson in my office. And I had a poster of Ben Carson in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, he was always about self-empowerment.
I knew who Ben Carson was.
Yeah.
And so now that he's endorsed Trump and kind of when Trump referred to him as a child molester or made the joke about it, and he just sat there and he still endorsed him. And it was like, are you going to stand up and assert yourself? And he just comes across like he's really passive, like he's just, hey, look, we've got all these aggressive white guys with power and forcefulness like Trump, and then we'll put Ben Carson in just to make black people happy that we're balancing the color code. But Ben Carson is like, he has, I mean, it's like he's been emasculated. I hate to use
right. So that's what you meant by beta as subordinate to the alpha, and the alpha dog in this case is Trump.
Exactly. And he's the only black person in the cabinet.
Right.
I mean, that's just, I mean, it's like he was perfectly put there just to show that. And the white male privilege now, as I was telling my buddies here, with Trump, this is why all the white supremacist men are coming out, because now they see there's an alpha there.
Right.
And it's only going to make, in my opinion, white male privilege worse. And you know, or not necessarily the white male privilege that you understand in terms of not necessarily having to think about it.
Oh, I think it's going way beyond that. I think he's stirring up white, and it's not just male, but because there are no shortage of white females who think this way. Male privilege is kind of the same thing, you know, that same basket of special goodies, and you don't have to worry about, you know, being groped or grabbed or whistled at, et cetera. So men have that privilege, but men of all races have that privilege relative to women of those same races. But the white privilege part of it, it's just wow. I don't. Go ahead, Tony.
My point is Tom, that now that that's on the forefront, what happens to blacks is now it's more acute. People pay more attention to it, and we're more likely to get injustice because of that.
Yeah, and the point, and where I was going with that when I went off on a tangent and was that what Trump has done is not just empowered or not just even kind of suppressed any discussion of white privilege, because now that's considered, you know, politically correct talk, and it's not allowed on Fox News and that kind of thing, and they ridicule it, and right-wing hate radio makes fun of it, and all that's, you know, let's put that back in the box, right? But the white supremacists, the people who look at, you know, Murray's book, The Bell Curve, and say, oh, you know, scientific evidence, the whites are superior to blacks, when actually it's, you know, it's completely debunked. And the systematic racism, and again, I say to white people, you know, we have systematic racism in the United States that is keeping black people in poverty and in metaphorical chains, and frankly, if you look at our prison population, in literal chains, and they're like, you know, well, you know, what are you talking about? And it's this, it's just this the whole process. The biggest example of it is the way that we fund our schools. You know, and this is a vestige of the 1870s, you know, of the 1880s of Jim Crow, which is, they called it local control. But really what it is let's make sure that black communities, poor black communities, have crappy schools, so that so that the folks who graduate from those schools will not be able to successfully compete with white people for employment or for social status. And so the way you do that is you make sure that they have poorly funded schools. And the way you do that is you fund your schools almost exclusively through the property tax. And this is why Donald Trump wants to destroy the education department. It's why Bill Bennett, when he was put on Ronald Reagan's cabinet, you know, he campaigned for president, Bill Bennett, in 1980, on the platform of doing away with the energy department, just like Rick Perry did the education department, just like Rick Perry did the energy department. And so Reagan put him in charge of the education department. And the whole idea was to stop federal funding to poor schools, particularly poor schools of color, inner city schools, urban schools, as opposed to like West Virginian schools, and stop that federal funding to keep people down. And if you want to know why, you know, in many parts of the country, black test scores are not as good as white test scores, all you have to do is look at the quality of the schools. And then people say, well, that's because it's black people going to those schools. And it's because they're paid for with the property tax. And you have, I used to be a consultant to schools, right? Back in the 90s, I was writing books on ADHD. I used to travel all around the country, going into schools, working with teachers and principals on how to train, on how to teach, you know, special needs kids, specifically ADHD kids. And, you know, I've been in the Detroit public school system. I've been in the Atlanta public school system. I've worked in them. And a lot of spots, you know, Muskegon, Michigan, Los Angeles. I've been in school systems all over this country. And it is so, you know, if you visit 20 or 30 schools around the country, ranging from, you know, affluent white suburbs to poor black areas, you get it. that, you know, this is intentional. This is not an accident. Yes, it's part of history, but you know, it was historically set up this way from the get-go as part of the separate but equal stuff that came out of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1898 and was carried through, you know, legal integration through the 60s. And so anyhow, I'm off on a rant here, Tony, but I think I said what I meant to say. Did I answer your questions?
Absolutely, you did, and I'm glad you went on that rant, because now my buddies are sitting here looking like, okay, I feel what he's saying, because they had not taken it into thinking about the schools. And see, here in Alabama, most of the prisons are privatized.
Yeah. Well, and they do the same thing, by the way, with
agriculture and prison. That's all they have here.
Yeah, and they do the same thing with, by the way, with police departments. You know, police departments are funded largely through local property taxes. So like in Ferguson, Missouri, the police department has a lousy tax base. They need money. What do? They stop people all the time, give them tickets to raise revenue. So black communities, poor communities, including and particularly black poor communities, because they've been the target of this more than anything else, end up, you know, basically everybody gets turned upside down and shaken until all the money falls out of their pockets. I got to go, Tony. Thanks.
To Thom Hartmann.